This is our second training. This is a shared experience, so I'm hoping to learn as much from you guys as I might convey to you. We're looking today at analysing survey data. So this is the second of the topics that was most requested by folks in Argyll and Bute like yourselves as to how best to go about really running through data to make sure that you've gathered and stories that you've gathered to help you understand and get your head around that in order to then form proposals for your local place plan. This is the second of 3 sessions. So next Thursday at the same time, we've got the third session, and we're going to be looking at how to best write your report and represent it. So, without further ado, that's me. Hello. So Thursday the 27th is the third one. I've jumped ahead of myself. So just to give you a little idea, a reminder, some of you have also been coming to the sessions I've been doing at the Scottish Community Councils Network. And this is the 6-step process that we present there, that I work to when I'm doing my action plans, and that we offer to you as a simple way of breaking down the different steps that you might want to take. Step 1 is foundation, step 2 is engagement, step 3 is analysis, step 4 is developing your draft, step 5 is the information notice period, the one bit of statutory consultation you have to do, and step 6 is submitting. So the first masterclass was really focused on the first couple of stages, thinking about using and understanding the local development plan and connecting with landowners. And next week, we're going to look at the back end of the process. But this week, we're right in the middle. So I want you to kind of imagine that you've gone through your engagement phase. You've talked to a lot of people in your community. You've gathered a lot of data. And they're all on different scraps of paper or on online spreadsheets, or they've been typed up. And you're going, OK, well, how do we actually work through this data in a meaningful way, so that we can have a good foundation to have proper conversations amongst ourselves as a steering group in order to begin to develop concrete proposals, which is stage 4, the next stage. But this week, I'm also going to throw in a couple of things to help you with gathering data, not just analysing it. And the reason for that is that data gathering and data analysis go hand in hand. So I am going to initially just show you something called Place Check, which is a data gathering piece of software. And then at the end, I'm going to show you how I run the information notice period using 2 simple online software tools. And the thing I just want to stress right at the beginning is it's not necessarily the case that gathering more data is better. What do I mean by that? Volume of data is not the biggest issue. What I mean by that is we could go out and create consultation experiences for people and maybe not get as many responses back as we expect. But what I've found in the past is that it can nevertheless be the case that the quality of data we get back is still excellent, even if we're disappointed by the number of people that come along. And there does come a point where the amount of data that we gather, in many ways, it only reinforces a mandate rather than giving you any new insights. Because there does come a point where extra person X or Y says the same thing as another person. You just tend to notice these trends. Of course, there's always going to be outliers, and people are always going to come in and maybe offer some new insight, so that, you know, we still want to get people involved, obviously. But you'd be surprised how little changes sometimes with more data. So there's a couple of reasons why I say this. One is not to be discouraged if you don't get as many people coming along to your consultations as you wish necessarily, because the people that do come are often very invested, very enlightened, and can give you some really high quality stuff. The second thing to say is, in terms of data management and flows, I want you guys to be reassured and to focus also on the capacity that you have, the time that you have to actually analyze data. So what do I mean by that? The more you go out to the community, the more data you will collect, and the more work you will have to analyze that data. And it's okay to also have in the back of your mind that you want to control the data flows to keep your own sanity. Please don't feel that you have to keep constantly go out to get more and more data, which just increases your workload. And remember I don't know if I said this in the last session, but my touchstone is we do the best we can with the resources we have. And that also applies to data collection, linked to data analysis. You only have certain time to analyze. Part of the consideration is only gather as much data as you can cope with to analyze. Right. So here's some questions you may have with regards to data analysis. What software do we recommend? What's the best framework in order to thematize my data, arrange the data? And how do I work with data gathered from different sources? These are just some of the questions you might have. I want to stress again, this is tips that I'm sharing from my own practice. Feel free to steal what works for you and change what doesn't, or you may have much better ways of doing this, in which case share that with us at the end. There will be a Q&A. Now, I sometimes say that, I mean, I have the privilege of receiving an income for some of this work. There's a huge amount of the work that I do with communities that I would probably just do for free. I feel like it's a vocation. It's something that I enjoy. The work that I probably least enjoy doing is analyzing data. And the reason for that is that it can feel quite, to be honest, it can feel quite tedious. For some people absolutely love it. But remember, I'd be doing it time and time again. Some of us just find it really, like, it's quite painstaking. And what I tell myself when that happens is that ultimately, this moment, the person that analyzes the data is the person that's doing the deepest listening to the community of any point in the process. And if there's one thing we're trying to do is listen to the community, it's the goal of all of this stuff. And so I try to remind myself, even when I'm feeling a bit sleepy or I want to have a break, but I need to get it done, that it's actually, I do try and remind myself, this is actually quite a sacred duty in the sense that people are offering their time, their passion, their expertise, and it's only a small sacrifice really for me to carefully listen. And that's what data analysis is, carefully listening, and it's a sacred duty. Having said that, some of us enjoy this stuff more than others. Some of us are more detail oriented, and this is an opportunity to delegate within your group to the people who are most keen on doing this stuff, who are most gifted at it, who are most interested. And the truth is, it can genuinely be fascinating to see our communities through the eyes of others. So just all of these things are at play when we're thinking about data analysis. But right at the heart of it all, I want to say, some of us will have been academically trained here. That is not the level that we are going to take this analysis to, unless you are really, really committed. And there are lots of big fancy words and ways to think about data. This would be usually this is a type of what's called qualitative analysis, as opposed to quantitative analysis, which is about numbers and figures. Qualitative analysis is where we assess concepts, thoughts, feelings. But we weren't even going to use those terms. At the end of the day, the three things that if you do this, I think that ultimately, at the level we're trying to do this for our communities, we will attain a really good standard. If we are consistent and honest and transparent with the way that we deal with the data and the stories that people give us, then we will not go far wrong. Whatever method we choose, whatever time we take, if we're consistent, honest, and transparent. So keep those principles in mind. They'll filter through the rest of this presentation. So I'm going to take you through a journey visualized by this very Lego brick model. And the end of the journey is to explain the journey with a story, ideally with images. And I'm doing that right now. It's all very meta. So this is me explaining the journey you're going to go on with a visual image using Lego. So I'm going to take you through data collation, thematizing, and representation. Collation involves getting all data from all different sources into one place, cleaning the data, and then tokenizing it, breaking it apart. Thematizing the data involves sorting and arranging it into drawing a fork through the curly spaghetti of your plate, making it all straight again. So that's going to be about looking at whether it's a community action plan project or an LPP proposal, or both. What's coming through, choosing a thematic framework, labeling as a primary theme, and then assigning sub-themes, and maybe thinking about merging and counting. And then finally, a little bit about representing, how to do that with a simple table, and then go on to still tell the story with maps and text. And then around that, I'm going to show you place check and Google Forms as a way of gathering data during your engagement phase and during information notice, because analysis and data and gathering go hand in hand. So first of all, deep breath, gathering. This is how I gather. This is one of the tools I use to gather data. So this is think of this as stage 2 leading into the main focus of our topic, and it's one part of what I do for stage 2, which is basically engagement. So there's 2 steps that I think about in engagement. There's diagnosis and there's focus. We use the magnifying glass in 2 different ways. So the first step I do is I try and diagnose where everyone's at in the community. So I go wide to the many with simple questions, allowing people to tell me from nothing, basically, without any steer, where they're at, what they think about their place. There's huge value in just getting an ear to the ground and hearing what people are actually saying in order to diagnose the current situation and not make any assumptions about past information, although we would want to bring that in to our local place plan. So there's diagnosis and then there's focus. And diagnosis helps us to get to the point where we figure out what people are really wanting to talk about. And I always say, when it comes down to the focus stage, which is when we would maybe create dedicated gatherings in different places, whether we go to people or they come to us to talk in deeper detail, I always say we don't want to talk about what the community doesn't want to talk about. And so we design our focus groups around what people actually want to talk about. It may be housing rather than natural spaces. But to understand what people really want to talk about and to have an evidence base to make sure that that's the case, if people challenge us as to why we're talking about housing with our limited time rather than in a detailed way, rather than specifically natural spaces, we say, well, we did this diagnosis stage where we figured out from scratch roughly where people are at. That's a brief overview of what I do for engagement. But the reason I've said that is that place check as a tool is a tool that I use for the diagnosis phase, for the first bit of the engagement process. And I would use place check as to launch. I do like a starter launch day to let the community know what's happening and that the process has started. And I would use that day to launch this online survey tool. Now, reason why I use place check or I recommend it is that basically it's free to community councils. Top right hand corner, small writing here. It's actually lists out the cost for using place check. And the very first one is if you're a community and neighborhood organization, civic society or school, it's free. So place check is run by a wee small group of enterprising folks in Englandshire, and they allow it to be used for free. And you can go to, if you haven't heard of it, you can go to www.placecheck.info. And basically, you can go there and then you can communicate with the people who run it and you can say, could you set this up for our community council area? And they will do that. And they will send you a link. And the link that you get will be specific to your place. Here's one that we set up for Balfron. And literally, you can see the URL. The guys at Place Check, they've said, okay, you're a community council. We'll set up Place Check for your area. In other words, when you click on this link, /map/app/map/Balfron, whether from a phone or your computer, you will come through centered on your community council area, an overhead map that looks like this, which I can zoom in and out of. This is Balfron, the village. You can go wider. You pay a little bit extra and they can put in a community council boundary if you think that's important. For most rural areas, not so critical. People kind of tend to know roughly where they are in rural areas. It's probably more important for highly urbanized areas. And then so you can zoom in, you can do this on a phone or not. Then people sign up and they put in an email address and their name, which you guys will not get access to when the data is exported. You won't see who's done it. You'll just get a code to see who's placed it. And then they can drop in 3 types of colors of pin. Orange is a change they want to see. Red is something they dislike, and green is something they like. Very open questions. What do you like, dislike, and want to change about your community? Perfect for your diagnostic survey. What's perfect about this as well is, apart from being free, for a map-based where the question in an LPP, the basic question is where? Where is this going to happen? That's basically what planning is about. Where is the right place for development, right? For a where-based survey, to have a map where people can drop a pin is perfect. And so, because the data export will show you a longitude and latitude for every pin that's been placed. So people drop a pin and they type in, this is what I want to see change, like, or a dislike. And they can zoom about and add as many comments as they like. And then they can click on other people's comments and upvote or downvote it. So someone here said, social local housing, this village needs more provision for local young people. And other people can then, once they've logged in, they can upvote or downvote that as well as adding their own pins. Now, some of you haven't heard of this. Some of you are at a stage in your process where this would be helpful. I cannot recommend it enough. And just use it if you can. Super helpful. Remember, and it works perfectly on a mobile phone. You can also upgrade it and pay a little bit more money if you have it. And people can just upload a photo next to their comment. And you can actually see a photo of the thing they're talking about. I'm just going to come back out of PlayStation. So that's my top tip for diagnosis and gathering data at that stage of the engagement phase. The reason why I've done that partly is because it's all linked together. So if I go back to my presentation now, I'm just going to stop sharing. And then I'm going to refresh my page and reshare so that I can get it all back onto full screen again. The reason why this is helpful is here's what you get out the back end. So you run your survey for, say, 2 or 3 weeks, you have a cutoff date, you communicate that clearly to the community, you finish, and then you ask the PlaceCheck guys to send you the spreadsheet. And this is basically what will come back to you. You'll get a first column is category, what are people saying, why are they adding it, how many people have upvoted or downvoted it, what the total count is. And then you get a longitude and latitude for that. Now, this is a really good basis to start gathering all of your data. So basically what I do is I use Excel to put all of my data into one long list of information. Now, there are lots of other tools that you can use for analyzing data. A lot of them you have to pay for. And increasingly with big data, there are various other options. Now, I tend to keep it simple with Excel for different reasons. Partly, it's easy to then train other people. Secondly, although it's a bit painstaking, doing it by hand almost, step by step, is a really good way of learning what people are actually saying and listening deeply. Having said that, if you can find ways of speeding this up yourselves, then go ahead. But basically, PlaceCheck will create an Excel spreadsheet for you. And I'm going to use this as an example for you guys as to how I would then gather all the data in the next steps. So I've got a little slide here. This is just a justification of why would you have a diagnosis phase right at the beginning of your engagement. to get a baseline understanding from scratch. It's really helpful to challenge or confirm your own convictions. You will all be coming to this process with your own thoughts about what should change in your place. If you go out with very open questions to your community, then you will discover if they're agreeing with you or not in a very honest and transparent way, coming back to our principles. That's really valuable because that will change your perception as someone wearing a hat that needs to honor and lead the community with what they're saying. That's really helpful. You can challenge your own convictions. You're going to get place-specific data. So people may say the same thing, but drop a pin in different locations. We need housing here 3 times and drop a pin in 3 different locations, which means that you have the ability to go back and see what those locations are in order to make an assessment as a steering group at the back end. So that place-specific data is really, really helpful to get through place check or a later focus stage. And then you get to justify your later focus group themes. Keep it really simple. I have seen at this stage, I have seen groups actually ask very detailed and very leading questions at the very earliest stage. I don't think that's honest, basically. Later, you can justify more detailed questions based on the data, but start with open questions. And just trust that people's responses, your crowdsourcing information, will create complexity. And believe me, it will. You will get your complexity by people's responses. Okay, so what do we do with the data? In this imaginary scenario, we've got an initial spreadsheet of data that's come from place check. In your place, you may have done your gathering in a different way. That's okay. And the first question is, how do we get it all together? And like I say, we start with, I just basically create a long list of people's comments, a really long list of people's comments in Excel. And then I begin to collate it. So this is our first bit. We're just going to look at how to collect data, how to clean the data, and how to tokenize it or break apart the data. What do I mean by all this? So first of all, we're getting data from online sources, and then maybe what you've done. Let's imagine that you've done some focus groups as well. You've typed all that up. So digitizing the data is also something to be aware of. The more data you collect, and that it's handwritten, whether through a survey or in a focus group, the more digitization you're going to have to do, probably, I think, in order to analyze the data. And that just takes time. So that's another reason just to be confident to find your own balance depending on the capacity you have. So we've got some stuff in Word, we've got some stuff as a place check export. And then what we do is we create a big long list of information. So I'm now going to the imaginary spreadsheet that you're going to be working with. So this is the sample place check export. And then here, that's helpful to have so you can keep the connections to the latitude and longitude. And just so you know, just in case I forget to do this, here's a comment on Balfron Library through place check. Well, what do we do with the latitude and longitude data? What we do is we highlight, if we want to know, well, where is Balfron Library or X other comment from place check? Just copy both the latitude and longitude. This is why I love place check, to be honest. Go to Google Maps. Very familiar. And literally just paste what you've copied into Google Maps, top left-hand corner, and press return. Bang. Google Maps has put pin exactly where someone has pinned it in place check. What this means is once you've converted the place check responses into an Excel document, every single comment, you can just go, right, cut and paste. Where was that pin? Stick it in the Google Maps. It's really good for going back and understanding what was where people were talking about without having to go back into place check and sort through all the pins, right? Anyway, so here's your place check export. Imaginary scenario, create a big long list of all the comments that have come through. So this was from Balfron. I mean, we got about 200 comments from Balfron. And then we save all of this, by the way, top tip, save every element as you go, just in case you want to go back or you make a mistake. And then we're going to start working on this data. So I've added in some columns that we'll look at in a minute further on. But first of all, we just want to clean and tokenize or break down the data. That's the first step of collation. So I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean by that. So data cleaning could involve all of these things. Resolving a comment that has a confusing mix of detail, removing offensive comments, removing illegible or nonsense comments, trimming white space. Now, top tip, if you're using Google Sheets and you go to Data tab, Data Cleanup, there are options for removing duplicate and trimming white space automatically. Trim white spaces, people often put in spaces in the document that makes it tricky for the computer to sort stuff. So it's about getting rid of the blank spaces. Data cleaning can be about amending the spelling and also removing duplicates. Okay. So what does that look like, right? Data, first, a confusing mix of detail. Here's a comment. Someone said, water security, dash. This is a popular walking route and making it safer and more user-friendly would enhance the community green spaces. And the pin was next to a river. I'm looking at that going, okay, the bulk of this comment is about creating a walking route along a river. What do they mean by water security? I think they're trying to say something there, but I just don't know what it is. I definitely know that what they're talking about is a walking route. So I would basically, this might seem a bit inappropriate, but this is what I would do. If I don't understand what's being said, I might check in with a buddy and go, do you understand this? If they go, no, I would just delete that. I'd say, look, I can't do anything with that. I can only do what I can understand. So I would deal with comments that inherently have a confusing mix of detail, but do have some important stuff in there. I would delete rude comments. I have had comments like this in the past. Get all the posh folks out who have moved here. I would just delete that. It does not deserve time of day. Bye-bye. Nonsense comments, random. The floppy duck jumped through the basketball hoop. Now, that could just be comments that you just don't understand. But sometimes people have just made a mistake. So I would delete those. Bye-bye. White space. Okay, so there's quite a lot of white space in this one. So I would either use the Google Data tool or I would remove the white spaces for later use. I might even just remove the exclamation mark. It's not really relevant. I would clean typos. So someone's put a $sign here. I'm going to replace that with an I for increase. And then later someone's put T instead of take. Right, I'm going to change that. And then I've got two duplicates. So when I see text that is exactly the same as another piece of text, particularly after I've sorted that column, I assume that that's a duplicate. Now, you could double check again whether actually two people through an online form have actually just submitted exactly the same thing and want to say that. And in place check, you would look at the user ID to do that. But in general, I would be suspicious and potentially just remove that duplicate. That's data cleaning. That's the first step of collation. The second step is what is technically called tokenization or breaking down data. So here's the thing, no matter how you ask a question, particularly if it's an open question, but even if it's not, what you will get back, particularly through online surveys, is people putting a response to your comment to your question that answers lots of other questions, not just your question. What happens is you get what I call a comment, which is a paragraph of text, which is all helpful, but very difficult to code in and of itself. And what I try and do there is I break the comment down into statements, individual statements, and that's called tokenization. And so here we've got a comment that's come back where someone said, establish a white yet to bowling club core path. That's one thing. By the way, the community orchard is a lovely place to relax. Two things. This is all coming back in one response. Oh, and the buses, we need the service to calendar. The service to calendar is good, but it's badly advertised. And I look at that and I go, okay, I understand everything's being said there. It's really difficult to code that. So I'm going to tokenize it, and I'm going to create 2 new statements from this comment. Oh, I'll just change the color of that. So I will break this comment down into 3 statements for the purposes of coding buses. And that is tokenization. Now, quite a lot of the hard work of all this is this first stage. It's the cleaning and it's the tokenization. But eventually you'll come up with a really long list of comments that are all really helpful and usable. But that is collation. Okay, stop. Any questions on that? Just now. Thing yet. Oh, Kathleen.
As a community, we've done a lot of the gathering, and we've done it verbally, and we've got a lot of information. Can we now take that information and put it into this type of spreadsheet to then use it?
That's exactly what I would do. So,
but people won't be able to do it individually. We've got a very, very elderly community, and they do not have the computer skills. But as I say, we've gathered a lot of statements.
So this stage is the responsibility of the steering group, Kathleen. So it would be you or one of your colleagues that brings this all in and digitizes it and types it up into the form. So I agree with you. It couldn't be the responsibility necessarily of folks who aren't computer literate, particularly if they've either verbally or in writing or in a focus group, you've got this written down in some form. Mm-hmm. It would be for your group to then digitize that data and type it into a spreadsheet, rather than for your community who might not be so confident to do that. Mm-hmm. Have I answered your question there?
Yes, and it's quite scary, the amount of work we're going to have to do. And there's 2 other people on this call who are probably agreeing with me there.
So it's not, so that's not an uncommon feeling to get at this stage.
6 minutes.
To feel a little bit overwhelmed, because we can get so much data and stories back. But if you break this down into chunks, take your time over this stuff and just consistently work your way through it and help one another to do that, I think it will work out. You might even also want to check in with Antonia, or possibly if you've got a little bit of money, this might be something you could go and ask someone else to help you with. There isn't really a way of shortcutting this stage, though, I'm afraid. Yeah. But if you're patient and you take time, I think it will come to you. Mm-hmm. I sympathize with you. I do sympathize. We all sympathize with you.
Thank you.
Okay. Danny is next.
Hi. I'm going back to your cleaning up. Is it reasonable to try to interpret things you don't understand? I'm thinking of your example of water security. What if you called it water safety and assumed someone was thinking about falling in the river?
So I think that is legitimate, but that comes down to you as a person who's doing this data. This is what it comes down to: consistency, honesty, and transparency. You have a judgment call to make as to whether you think you know is what's being talked about, and whether you think you're confident enough to interpret that. Because in many cases, you're not going to get a chance to go back to the person who made that comment in X focus group or online. So it's your choice. But that's where personal integrity for the data coder comes in as to how you want to deal with that. Sheila.
I have a question, whether or not you're going to address it later, and that is the diversity of people who may have made the comments, whether they may be, say, the 15 to 25 year age group, or over 70 age group or something, and also men and women have different understandings about the needs and aspirations for their place. Is there any way at this stage that you can make those kind of assessments about who is saying what about which theme? Thank you.
So that is a really, really good question, Sheila. I'm going to talk, so to briefly, best I can do to respond to that is I talk, so for everyone here, you may have run a survey where you've also gathered information. This won't happen in focus groups, but if you've run a survey, an online survey, you may also have asked what I call segmentation questions, which are questions not about what people want to say, but that reveal who the people are that are making the comments, their age, their gender, etc. So you can do that. So you can ask segmentation questions, and then they can be linked in some kind of spreadsheet at the back end to the comments that people say. The first thing I want to say about that is, I will say this later, the basic principle of data protection in GDPR is that you do not gather data that you do not need. So the first thing to assess is whether you actually need any segmentation data. Okay. Usually I don't go as far as gender. I would maybe do, I'd maybe get a spread of ages, like 6 ages, 0 to 18, 18 to 29, 30 to 39, blah, 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 all the way through to 70 plus. And then I'd maybe have 3 options for people as to show how they're connected to the community. I live here, I work here, or study here. And then the third option is I neither live nor work here, but I have an interest in the place. That's as far as I would go with data collation on segmentation data personally, because I don't think it's really legitimate to ask that much more than that personally, but that's the choice of the surveyors. And I can see an argument either way. Going into gender is tricky, partly because then you have to offer multiple types of gender. The other tricky thing, to answer Sheila's question more directly, is when you're analysing data with the time and capacity you have, how easy is it to thematize data into different categories and retain the connection, the data linkage between your thematized data and any segmentation data that you have got? Now, if you break apart your comments into statements, then you've then got a question as to how connected to the segmentation data you keep it. Here's the truth, that is a very complex thing to try and do, to retain the connection between segmentation data and coded data. I'm not going to go into it, but it's actually really complicated. Unless you are a computer programmer or you're a whiz with access or database, that's really tricky to do. So what I genuinely, Sheila, here's my answer. I use segmentation data to give an overview of the responses as pie charts, but I don't retain the data linkage between segmentation and comment. Now that might be a different practice to what you would like to see, and you might have other ways of going about it. But it's just too much work for me, and I don't have the skills to retain those linkages in an integrated way. So I keep an overview of the segmentation data and show people at the end during the report, like, this is the age spread of responses, this is where people were located. But then I don't create the opportunity to search specific comments against specific age ranges or locations. But just see, how do you feel about that, Sheila?
On some issues, that would be fine. On other issues, for example, housing, that may be problematic, given where the complexity may be required to understand the different demands and objections within the community. I mean, it is a tricky issue. I fully accept that. but there are well-known differences not only on age but on gender in relation to housing requirements and related issues like childcare, for instance, that one can easily mask by only using, for example, age and having no breakdown. One way to do it may be to have gender-specific focus groups to try to draw out any differences, perhaps in the needs and aspirations of women of different ages in the community from men of different ages in the community. But each community is going to have such a diversity of residents that it would have to be based, I suspect, on the local requirements and time, effort, resourcing, etc.
Yeah. So all of this is thank you, Sheila. So all of this is really, really valuable conversation for everyone to think about. I agree with you that if you, my way of going, if you're particularly concerned around some specific people group or response or view, the way I would try and do it is to go into focus groups and to ensure that you hear those voices, or to pay attention during your listening phase to understand what's coming through. And I also agree that it's really important to try and not obscure the reality of different perspectives, however you do it. I would agree with you that the way to do that isn't. It depends how complicated you want to get into your data analysis, but if you do gender-specific focus groups, for example, that could be really helpful to make sure that we elevate those important perspectives. I'm going to move on at this point. Jane, there'll be other opportunities for questions, but we'll just move on for now, if that's okay. So we've got tokenization we've just covered. So I've got a slide here that just makes it really clear what that looks like. So now we're going to move on to thematization. So we now have a long list that's been cleaned and tokenized. So we can start working on labeling and categorizing this data in the spreadsheet. So the first step is to sort the data generally. The first step I do there is to think, well, is this a community action plan project, a local place plan proposal, or both? And then I assign or label a primary theme. And for this, I use the themes of the place standard. And then the next step is to make that analysis more granular, more precise by doing sub-themes once I've sorted the primary theme. So the first run through is important if you want to discern whether a comment might be talking about a CAP project or a local place plan proposal. This is important, particularly if you are resource constrained and you only want to sift out the data that is related to place and meaningful for the planning system and your local place plan. In some cases, community groups I've worked with, they don't have the time to do a whole report that covers a community action plan and a local place plan, and they just want to focus on one rather than the other initially. So they might sift out the comments that are particularly related to place, the use and development of land and buildings controlled by the planning system. Now, discerning what that is can be a little bit tricky, but essentially what the image I use is you're casting your net out wide and you're going to catch both fish and crabs. Sorry, Tina, you've heard this before. And they're both valuable catches, but for the local place plan, there's stuff that, setting up a youth group is not controlled by the planning system and is not necessarily related to land or buildings. It could be if you need to build a new building for the youth project, but you don't want to spend time thinking about the youth group stuff if what your focus is creating a local place plan for your community. Now, if you have the time, then you can do this and then work with all the data. That's fine. If you don't, you can then siphon off the community action plan data and say, okay, well, that's there. It's there to be used later when we've got time. We can come back to it in a few months, or vice versa. So sometimes it's a bit tricky to discern whether it's a planning issue or not, or to do with loose land and buildings. Just do your best, or try and connect with someone who's maybe a planner who's on your group, or get some advice from the local authority. But if you go to the guide for community delivery of local place plans created by Planning Aid Scotland, which you can get on their webpage, www.pas.org.uk/resources, which I wrote, there's a section in there that talks about the different, what kind of issues could be related to development and be meaningful for the local place plan, and what issues are generally not related to development, use of land and buildings, and are more for a cap. So there's a list there that you'll get in the slides, but also you can go and look at the original document. Anyway, once I've done that, I would then assign a primary theme category. And for this, although I don't use the place standard, now the place standard is a tool designed in Scotland. You can Google it and find out more about what that is. It's well known and well used across Scotland. I don't tend to use the place standards in its form as a method or a tool to actually consult communities. If I'm honest, I find it a bit clunky to do that. What I do find the place standard really helpful for, and remember, this is just my practice, is I think that as a list of topic themes that are comprehensive and cover in the round everything that you might want to say about a place, it's really helpful. And it's also helpful to thematize your data to the place standard, in my opinion, because it's a currency, a known language amongst funders, local authorities, the Scottish government, and even communities across Scotland, because it's become so popular. So it's a good way to express yourself and express the themes that you're talking about in a way that will be understood and received by the people you're trying to talk to. So the place standard has 14 themes: moving around, public transport, traffic and parking, streets and spaces, natural space, play and recreation, facilities and services, work and economy, housing and community, social interactions, identity, belonging, feeling safe, care and maintenance, and influence and control. Well, that's my dog barking in the background, and the doorbell's just gone. Hopefully my wife will answer that. Now, a couple of points. Community issues I put under social interaction, and I don't think about housing and community. I just think about housing as one category. I'm really sorry. I'm just going to have to pause this. Forgive me. Sorry, folks. So housing and community is confusing if you don't just call it housing, which is a big topic. So just call it housing. And then you might want to have a separate topic for climate issues, which could be climate adaptation, which is solutions to that your local community would like to see implemented to deal with the impacts of climate change, such as flood barriers. Or it could be climate mitigation, which is dealing with the root causes, which could be you want to set up a community renewables project, for example. I would have those as a separate theme. But it's also arguable that our responses to climate should be woven through all of these themes. We need housing that is net zero. We need streets and spaces that have trees that cool our areas and will protect us from increased heat, etc., etc. Anyway, so those, I would use 15 categories, and I'd have another one, general, which is other stuff that is important but doesn't really come under a theme. So what does that actually look like? Go back to our spreadsheet. Okay. So this is a popular walking route, and making it safer and more user-friendly would enhance the community green space. Okay. Is that a CAP or an LPP thing? So if there is an existing walking route there and it's about maintenance, then it's probably a CAP thing, because local place, the planning system doesn't control maintenance of paths. If people are, however, trying to establish a new path and you want to map a route as an aspiration for the future to develop that, then that would be a planning thing. So it could be both, actually. Why isn't that typing properly? Hello. Oh, I just realized maybe it's, do I need to change the, sorry, folks, bear with. Yeah. Okay. So it's both. We need a youth club desperately. Okay, that's a cap issue. Increase community sports facilities. Would it be possible to take some of the land adjacent to the school to create a community sports facility? Almost certainly an LPP proposal. Could be both if it's also about wanting to create a community group that might get the funding to deliver that as well. We need a home for the elderly. Okay, well, that's housing. So that's definitely for an LPP. Establish a core path. That'll be LPP. Because that's an aspirational new core path. Buses. So almost invariably, people talking about the need for bus services, really, really critical issue. But basically, bus services aren't controlled by the planning system. So that would be a community action plan project or initiative to try and convince the council or the bus operators to make a difference there. So you get the idea, you'd go through and do that, and then you can sort on any of these things. And then we would assign a primary theme. So walking routes, I see, Catherine, you've got a question. Could we come back to that a bit later? Walking routes, so what would the place standard category for that be? Well, moving around is the place standard category. So if we just type that in. Youth club, well, even though it's a CAT proposal, the primary theme for that, I would say that's community, so it's about social interaction. I just put it under that topic. Immediately, I want to point something out. So going back to our core principles, if you're using the place standard, you might assign a different primary theme to the one I'm choosing. That's okay. There's no right way to do it, but the key thing is that you personally are consistent within your coding, so that if you're thinking this comment is about a youth club and you've chosen social interaction, you always use that theme. Does that make sense? As long as you are consistent, you don't have to do it. You don't have to assign it to a particular category when something could be one or the other. Sports facilities, okay, that's play and recreation in terms of place standard. And housing. So that would come under the housing category of the place standard. Okay. And so on. So you can imagine going through your whole list. Now, eventually, you're going to get to the point where every comment has been arranged as either a CAP or LPP or both comments, and also have a primary theme. And of course, you can then start using Excel to sort those. So you can sort A to Z. And it's basically a moment where you put the fork through the spaghetti and you let the system use its power to do this. So you sort A to Z, and suddenly everything gets ordered according to the categories that you've assigned. So if I put this in here, so you can see all the care and maintenance stuff is next to each other. All the climate adaptation stuff is in one place, all the facilities and services. So immediately you've used Excel after tagging the data to make it clear the basic category that each comment falls into. And then this is where you move on to moving from arranging to sorting, to use the terms that I put in the Lego categories. You can then assign a sub-theme. So care and maintenance might be a primary category, but you can assign a single sub-theme. And you make up your sub-themes yourselves, basically. So the technical languages, if you use an existing framework, like the place standard, that's called deductive coding. So you're assigning a comment to a pre-existing category. If you then add a sub-theme where you're making up a more detailed category to assign to a comment or a statement, then that's called inductive. You're working from the bottom up. So the first one, care and maintenance, this path could be better maintained. There is often glass on the path. So this particular type of care and maintenance is about path maintenance. So you're assigning a specific sub-theme there. Hate all the dog poo, that will come up. That would go under care and maintenance in my book. But the sub-theme would be litter, dog fouling. The clack and burn. So in heavy rain, we need to deal with the stormwater outfall into the clack and burn. Well, that's flood prevention as a type of climate adaptation to do with flood prevention. And again, this is about having honesty and integrity and consistency. So you make up the sub-themes. You don't even need to do this stage necessarily, depending on how much data you've got. Primary themes might be enough for you, but I usually go to sub-theme just to break it all down. And then you can sort by both primary theme and sub-theme. And then what that results in is often you've got maybe 3 or 4 comments that are saying the same thing. And then you can count them and assign a number because people are saying the same thing, and you can see how many times people have actually said it. It'll give you a certain weighting if that's what you require. Now, I don't have too much time to go more into that, but you've seen the basic process there. So what could you expect to end up with over time? Something that looks a bit like this. So you've got a list of statements. You've allocated whether they're for CAP or LPP. You've given them a primary theme, and then you've given them a sub-theme. And you've ordered that into a big, long table. This then becomes, if you're thinking about the next step, moving from stage 3 to stage 4, which is developing the draft. When you sit with your steering group to consider, or someone sits down and begins to write a draft of the proposals for consideration, they can work from this document, this spreadsheet, where everything's really clearly laid out, and start working up some proposals based on what people have said under particular themes. What you've got is, you've also got a framework for your report production, because you can create a report based on different themes that breaks down your proposals under climate, under housing, under path networks or active travel. That's all started for you. You've begun the framing of your actual final report. And you've got some really detailed, you've kept all the detail of what people are saying, and you've got a jumping off point to then have more conversations around the beginnings of your draft proposals. Okay, so that is basically how I would go about arranging and sorting the data. Now, just as an observation before we pause it, which place standard themes lend themselves to local place plan proposals? So this is just a guide for you. If you're using the place standards as a thematizing framework, very often the categories of moving around, which is walking, wheeling, and cycling, is going to be a local place plan proposal. Quite often traffic and parking, which is about vehicular traffic and movement, and parking. Parking, if it's related to land, a new car park might be a local place plan proposal. But remember that, or thinking about the types of traffic speeds and road bumps that might want in a new development, that's controlled by planning. But if you want speed bumps or a new level crossing on an existing road, planning doesn't really control that. That's controlled by the roads department. So that could be an LPP proposal or not. Streets and spaces are often to do with local place plan, so that could be about how you arrange the public space in your town centre. Natural spaces might have to do with protecting natural spaces, so making a proposal for a local biodiversity site, for example. Play and recreation is often to do with play parks or green space. That can often be a local place plan thing. Facilities and services, so new buildings, where they might go. Housing, obviously local place plan. Public transport is often a CAP proposal. Social interaction is about events, gala days, youth work, how we all connect. Maybe slightly more traditional community development kind of things that Antonia and Kirsty might be a bit more familiar with. Identity and belonging, feeling safe, That is often about crime. It's not really controlled by planning. Could be about lighting. That could be a local place plan thing. Care and maintenance is almost always not to do a proposal for a local place plan if you want to try and get the planning system to make a choice. Because planning doesn't control how you maintain roads, and then influence and sense of control. That's often about politics, local politics, how we can work together. That's just a little guide to help you think through that if you're using the place standard themes. So I'm just going to do a last little whiz. It's already 11:05. You guys have been great. A last little whiz through a couple of other points, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. But I see Catherine's got a question. So once we've done all of that, we want to represent it. And this is about how we then draft proposals and then ultimately represent it in a report. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but we want to take the data we've got and the proposal we've got, and we want to tell a story. Essentially, what a local place plan is you're trying to tell a compelling story about the future of your place. And the more you can move beyond data and then tell a compelling story with maps and words, the more attractive that people who aren't specialists will find it. So you've got two audiences. You want to talk to the planners and the other departments of the council, and you want to talk to your community and get them on board with stuff. So the good thing about creating stuff in a spreadsheet, if we go back to what that looks like, imagine a spreadsheet here, and it's all arranged. You've done all the work of arranging it into a table that's really clear, like this. You can literally, potentially, as part of your report, just copy and paste that into your Word document or whatever format you're using and turn it into a table. It becomes really easy to represent a table within your Word document once you've done all the hard work in Excel. So that saves a big job. You can change the colors and change the layout, put in some extra data, but that's a good way of representing your data. And then for an LPP, the idea is that you would then tell a story with a map. So you would show the location that your proposals that have been worked up from your data is focused on. And if you've used place check, then you'll have the coordinates that you can go back to and help draw those maps. This is an example from North Berwick. This has been graphically designed. Remember, you don't have to feel overwhelmed with that. You just do we don't have time to go into that this week. We'll look at it next week, but it can be very simple. This is a little bit more complicated than many people need to create. For maps, you could even hand draw them as long as they're clear. Although nowadays, a lot of people find it a bit easier just to use a simple program or tool. We'll look at that next week. Some tips and insights. First of all, how much is a good return for surveying? I would say if you get 10%, if your community is 300 people and you get 30 people coming to you and giving you information, that's a good return. If you get anything more than that, you're doing really well. That 10% rule, I apply that to community development as well. Usually at most, you're going to back about 10% of people in a place stepping up to actually help do stuff at any given time. So if you get less than that, though, you may want to look at more thinking about how you've gathered the data. Is there a problem here with how we've let people know about what's happening? Is there a marketing issue? Have we chosen locations that people don't feel safe coming to for some reason? Have we chosen times that haven't worked for people? So you might want to look at it that way. Equally, you might want to look at it and go, look, we've done the best we can with the resources we have. We may have got less than a 10% response rate, but actually the data we've got is really high quality. And we don't have to reach a certain threshold as an evidence for the community statement of support. And anyway, we're also going to go back out once we've worked up our local place plan during the information notice period and let people know what's going on there. Remembering, like I said at the beginning, more data is not necessarily better data. Find the right balance between the ability to get data and your capacity to process it. At a certain point, more data just becomes more strength to your mandate, not necessarily greater insight. Some things to consider. Make sure that you've considered data storage, particularly if you are gathering named data. My recommendation is to try and not gather anyone's named data at any point in the process and just avoid the trickiness of that GDPR element. Whenever you're working with data, make sure that you've given authority, clear authority to key people to use that data, and that those lines are clear so that nobody gets confused and there's clear ownership. And also make sure that you're working from one data set. Maybe save some previous versions, but always just make sure you don't get confused between the main version you're using. You might want to share between people if you're all helping with coding, although that can be a bit tricky through Google Drive. When you're analysing, it can help to do in small batches. Just give yourself a break. If you're not sure what a statement's trying to say, buddy up with someone and get their insight. If neither of you can decipher it, maybe it's just a comment to be deleted, unfortunately, despite your best desires. When selecting best categories, like I said before, just use your best judgment, but be consistent. It's very useful for subsequent stages to know the data well. So whatever happens, whoever's coded the data will have a huge amount of insight to share with the steering group to help get an understanding of where people are coming from. Trust the process. Don't make assumptions where you don't need to. Overall, with 200 comments, whatever happens, there's a certain scale at which you're going to get a really good sense of the trends. And that's an also really important element. If you find a particularly rich statement or comment that says something that you think the community is trying to say, but in a particularly concise and well-rounded and authentic way, copy-paste it into a separate document, which you can then use to drop into your Word document for your report as a call-out box and show the real authentic comments that people are saying in your community. That's a really attractive thing to drop back into your plan. So don't lose. Someone might say something perfectly that everybody else is saying. Just copy paste it and drop that in as an example to your document. And then finally, we're just going to come back to what I said before about the connection between analysis and gathering. So the one bit of consultation that you must do, the guidance says you don't have to do any consultation. What you have to do is show what consultation you've done. So there's no threshold as to what is good consultation, because the government wants to give you the freedom to use the resources and skills and techniques that you have to hand to do what you need to do. The one thing that you must do once you've created your draft plan is what's called the information notice. Now, what that is basically stage 5 here is that you must share your plan with your ward councillors and surrounding community councils for a minimum of 28 days to allow them to come back to you with representations about what they think about the plan. You can then, once you've finished that information notice period, you can take those representations into account if you want to. You could adjust your plan based on what people have said. You don't have to, but you should submit those comments that come back to you alongside the plan in your statement of community support for the arbiters, the local authority, to also assess. And you may also want to explain why you haven't taken these comments into account. So you must share it, get the comments, share those comments back up to the local authority in your statement of community support. But you don't necessarily, after discernment, have to make any changes to the position you take as a community body, because somebody has to take a position, and that's you, the community body. But what many communities do during the information notice period is they also take the opportunity to go beyond the statutory minimum, and they go back out to their community for a final check. And they say, look, this is the draft plan. What do you think of it? Here's how I would do that if you go to that level, which you don't have to statutorily. This is just a summary of what I've just said. Before I go to going a bit wider with the community, if you want to know how to do the information notice, you basically send an email and track that you've sent it to all the right people, the secretary and the councillors around about you. And you can get a template. You can see a template letter to send out. And here I've got a link, which is you'll be able to click through on the slides when you get them. Scottish Borders have done some really good templates. They'll give you a template for sending to your ward councillor, a template to send to your community councillors. Copy paste it, change the detail, send them out by email, keep a note of the people you sent it to, and then pop that into your statement of community support. You don't have to get a response. You just have to show that you sent it. So if you don't get a response, that's okay. If you go wider to your community and you want to get people's comments on that, on what you've done as a local place plan draft, here's what I would do. I create a Google form, and I create a question for each proposal in the Google form, and I allow people to take a position on each proposal as they work through maybe 15 proposals. Object, support, neutral, and then I give them a box to make a comment as to why they've taken that position or what they'd like to see changed. But I character delimit that box to 50 words. And this, coming back to my principle, you don't want to overwhelm yourself with a whole bunch of extra information. So what does that look like? Well, I've just done this for Argyll Community Council. And I'll just go to the form I created. So Google form is free to use if you have a Google account. And so far we've got 25 responses. So I put the first page is information about what the local place plan is, how people can respond, what the meaning of the response is during the information notice period. GDPR, although you're not going to take name data, just cover your back. Then some segmentation data. Are you an individual citizen, a ward councillor, a local community group? So I allow people to respond as local community groups, not just as individuals. Or are you a neighbouring community council? What's your age? What's your connection to the community? 3 options. And then I go, for each proposal, I create this, I just create a question, which is basically, here's proposal 1 or A. Please choose whether you support, you're neutral, or you object to it. Here's the map. Read your local place plan at the same time, and then tell us what you think about that, and give them 50 words to do it. And what that's going to create is, it's going to give you automatically some segmentation data images that you can just copy and paste into your statement of community support. And it's also going to give you a whole list of data as to people's comments on the actual draft, which is invaluable. You can see what people actually think about what you've done. There's a triangulation point. Copy paste that into a Word document, and you can, because it's broken down by proposal, it's very easy for your steering group to go through that alongside the ward councillors. Again, what you're doing is you're building up a picture. You can then respond and change the draft based on what the community said or not. It's up to you. But the most powerful thing with this is that you can then submit all of that also as your statement of community support, which shows amazing mandate and amazing engagement, because you've not just engaged the community, you've checked in with them. And you can submit all the comments, whether they agree with your proposal or not. Which means that when you next meet your neighbour and they say, well, why did you keep that in? You say, well, we had to come to a position as a steering group. That's our job. But although I recognise you disagreed with us, we sent all the dissenting comments as well as all the agreeing comments and neutral comments to the final arbiter, the local authority, to assess for themselves. So we have represented your view, even though we had to take a position or felt with conviction our position needed to be different for yours. We honoured your dissenting view and we passed it to the final arbiter, which covers your back. And it also creates an incredibly authentic and meaningful and real statement of community support. Gives a lot of credibility to you if you do it that way. So, landing. A little slide, you can review this. This is basically what a statement of community support needs to include: a brief description of the consultation activities, an estimation of the number and interest of people and organisers involved, a brief summary of what views were expressed. Now, the guidance says brief. I don't do that. I just send it all. So the local authority planners need to make their assessment themselves. So capture the dates, attendees and numbers of all comments, of all engagements, whether that's online or not. Take some photos of with people's permission, of the groups that you've got, and then put it all together as a part of your report or a separate document as your statement of community support, and throw in everything that you've got back through your information notice period. But remember, at the heart of all of this, in terms of analysis, consistency, honesty, and transparency. That's the key issues. Stop. There's still some time for questions. The official finish is 11:30. I'm happy to go on longer than that. Stop sharing. I think we're going to stop recording. Stop sharing. I think we're going to stop recording.